Back at it again to have another wonderful conversation today. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It's brought to you by St. Luke's Penn Foundation Mental Health Services with our hosts, Jody McCloud Missmer and Amie Alanson Dundon. I am Kevin Crockett. Happy to once again be bringing you another episode of this podcast. I'm going to start. We have a guest today with us, my friends, and he's on vacation. So what better way to spend vacation than on a podcast? I want to introduce Gordon Hornig, who is the Mobile Engagement Services Director at St. Luke's Penn Foundation Mental Health Services. Gordon, thanks so much for stepping away from, I know you're a track and field coach. That's what you're doing with your vacation, but thanks so much for stepping away to embrace us for a podcast today. We appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you.
We had the opportunity to talk a little bit off air about track and field a little bit. Most notably, Noah Lyles getting a sandwich made after him. And I just want to come back to this for 1 second because, Amie, thank you for giving a real answer of a cheesesteak with no onions. Jody, would you like to tell everyone what if you had a sandwich named after you, what that would consist of?
I think it should be with cucumbers and cream cheese.
Jody.
I don't eat meat, so I feel it would be okay if you want to throw some meat on it. You can put some smoked salmon on it.
Okay, see, I feel like that's a sandwich there.
That's better than cucumbers on bread.
Yeah, she didn't say bread. She just said cucumbers and cream cheese. We don't even know what kind of bread.
That's true. Probably no bread.
You could do sourdough. Give it a little
You could
spice.
just eat it between two pieces of
my
lettuce.
mother sent me to school with peanut butter and lettuce sandwiches. Okay, thank you.
Ooh.
Moving right along. Yeah. No, but here's the thing. I highly recommend it. Very good. White bread, lettuce, crisp from the garden, and peanut butter. If you like celery with peanut butter, it's really a crunchy celery with peanut butter sandwich. Without okay.
Crockett.
Hi, Gordon. How are you this
path
morning?
Yeah, Gordon, by the way, welcome. This is what you're seeing, what you get around here, buddy. No, but we do have a very serious conversation today. And in all seriousness, Gordon, thank you for joining us. I know you're taking some time for us, so we do appreciate it. The conversation today, as we are introducing St. Luke's Penn Foundation Mental Health Services as the bringer-over of this podcast for you guys. Today, we're going to be talking about dealing with a loved one's addiction as a family, which obviously, as all of our conversations are, we like to start with a lighthearted bit of back and forth, but we get very serious very quickly. So, Gordon, I just wanted you to take a little bit of time, maybe give us a little bit about your background and kind of a role that you'll play in having this conversation with us today.
Sure. So I've been at St. Luke's Penn Foundation 30 years now, in the same role as mobile engagement. I was a field worker and then moved up the ranks and got to advance the initiative of kind of going out and meeting people where they're at that were dealing with substance abuse. So in that 30 years, got to experience really a cycle of substances. You know, it seems like every 10 years there's a new substance, a new symptom, and a new family problem. So in that 30 years, just got a chance to work side by side with families and individuals and bring some hope to their lives.
Ladies, I want to pivot to you here. Let's talk about that hope, because this I'm sure at times can feel like a very difficult road to go down as a person watching a loved one who's struggling with addiction. Amie, I'll go ahead and start with you. Just kind of, where do you start? Because that can be a difficult conversation to have for a number of reasons, but just, okay, this is the position that we're in. We kind of see a situation presenting itself. How do we kind of start that conversation?
Well, I think one of the first things that a family unit has to do is work through that denial that generally surfaces for the entire family unit when you're trying to really not have to embrace addiction within your family. So oftentimes it's a lot of making excuses for or minimizing, or it's not that bad or whatever. So I think, first of all, it's recognizing that 40 to 60% of addiction risk is genetic, even if parents or grandparents don't have an addiction. So you can take the blame out of it. It's nobody's fault. And I think part of that is the stigma of addiction. And if we own it as a family, then as a parent or grandparent, I must have done something wrong, and we're going to stay really far away from that. So I think it's having that conversation openly and understanding that disease is disease is disease, whether it's medical, mental health, substance use, to start there. And then once you kind of get that discussion started, or you start to own some of that, it's, okay, what role do I play in this addiction in the family? Everybody in a family plays a role in somebody's addiction. And we've gotten really good in the world of therapy and psychiatry at defining those roles and naming those roles and helping people kind of say, where do I fit? What do I do? What are the things that I'm doing that are maybe making this worse or not making it better? And how do I start to fix that for myself instead of trying to fix the addict or the alcoholic?
I think you play a role in the addiction, but you play a role in recovery too. And
Yes.
sometimes, I would say most of the time, it's a backup role. You're a supporting cast member as a family member. I think, and that's hard for, a mom to take a back seat to their child's pain. That's really, really tough because you're supposed to be the protector, speaking personally, you're supposed to be the one that makes it all better. And you can't. That's the crazy part, is that you actually can't. You have to play a completely different role that for some moms is not normal. It's not natural. It's not a natural position. But once I think you sit there and you go, oh, wait, this is more effective. This works better. I think that's really helpful. And I think that's where you come in, is really helping families. I mean, what is mobile engagement? Maybe helping people understand, like, what do you do?
So my first thought is I listen. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the most important part. They're looking to speak to someone and let them know what they're feeling inside the family member. So just being there and listening to them, going out to them. So different families are at different points in their situation. Some families are like, I've had enough. This is going to be a change. That's a little bit easier family to actually go out and talk to because they want my attention. There's a lot of families that are just stuck. It's this repetitive, I call it the Groundhog Day effect. The movie, it's the same thing over and over and over, and they've tried something new. That's a little bit more of a difficult family to deal with. So what I'll do is I'll sit there and listen to them at first, but that takes time. So I'll set up 2, 3, 4 meetings. Sometimes it's in the same week, just letting them unload so I can get a better understanding of kind of where they're at. Once I understand where they're at, then I can start to help them. So I use the analogy, when you get on the plane, right, they say they go through all the routines.
The oxygen mask.
There's the oxygen mask. And I think that's really important to remind them that I'm here to help you, even though their thought is I'm helping my loved one. But really, I'm helping them first. Because if they can't help themselves, at some point they're going to stumble. Now, I don't expect it to happen that first or second session. But what I'm doing is I'm building trust, that they have someone they can talk to and they're going to get honest feedback. Even if it's hurtful, if you can get that genuine relationship developed, I think that's where we go. So I'm looking to start a relationship, basically, is what MES is.
And I think what's important for people to realize who are listening is we're not talking primarily about the individual who's misusing substances. We're actually talking primarily about the people who surround that individual, right? That's the key difference. Why?
Well, again, I think there's a systems approach, and I also like the strength that I want to reach out to the healthy individuals and start, injecting healthy decisions and processes rather than the unhealthy, just everyday unhealthiness, decisions, discussions, and arguments, because they get caught up in these irrational beliefs. It becomes just a cloud of judgment. But I go back to it's all about that relationship building, but then it's educating them. So, the MES role evolves depending on where the family is. We say in the field, in both mental health and drug and alcohol, we want to meet the person where they're at. Well, I don't want to guess where they're at. I want them to tell me where they're at. And then I walk side by side with them.
Can we talk a little bit? We've referenced family, obviously, which is a big part of this equation. Jody, to use the word you said, kind of backseat, whether that's a parent, a significant other, a sibling, whatever, someone close to a person who is dealing with addiction, just kind of this supporting cast idea. I want to talk a little bit about the difference kind of between showing support and enabling, because I think to your point, Jody, you specifically mentioned moms. We, as a parent, I think we all want to do everything that we can to try to help our kids, support our kids. And one of the difficult things about addiction typically is maybe you feel like this is the only way that you can keep a family member close to you, is to bring them back and to enable, so you can basically see that they're, just the idea of them being in your presence, to see that they're okay, somehow gives you a sense of relief, even though you know that the chances of them going back out the door and making a good decision probably aren't great. I just want to talk a little bit, and Amie, I'll start with you a little bit. That difference, the fine line between showing support, being supportive, and possibly being an enabling factor in all this, because Gordon, I'm sure when you sit down with families and have conversations, you kind of alluded to the families that are, we've had enough, we're ready to take the next step. And then there's, to borrow your word, some more difficult situations other than that. So just that gap, that difference between showing support and what's actually enabling a loved one.
So enabling is kind of holding the addict or alcoholic's hand, the way I think about it, and leading them to their drug or alcohol, their drug of choice or their alcohol, in order to keep them safe. So maybe it's somebody that, if they stop drinking, they're going to start to feel sick and not feel good. So I'm going to drive to the state store and get them a bottle so that I know that they're not going to get sick. Or I'm going to continue to give this 17-year-old allowance money every week, knowing full well that they're taking that money and they're going to buy pot or meth or whatever it might be. You can also emotionally enable people, right? To kind of smother them and caretake and for all what you feel in your heart to be the right reasons. But I can, because I know that they're depressed or anxious or whatever, I'm going to just kind of take care of all of their needs and make sure that and really your enabling is what can I do emotionally, physically, financially to keep them from not being homeless or leaving the house
or getting in trouble
or getting, how do I, can I head, I know that they went out and they just stole something from CVS to sell for drugs. And I'm going to make sure that, talk to them about not going into stores that have video cameras. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I don't want them to get in trouble. So we're going to talk about maybe where there's not surveillance cameras. Like that's enabling, right?
And I would say you need to be careful that you don't go in the other direction where I think there's a middle ground. There's a middle ground of enabling, and then there's the other like extreme tough love. And then there's sort of that space in the middle where it sounds like that's what you're trying to get families to. And I think each family has to find that path, but they need the education component of it. I think that's key. I remember going to a support group, and it was the first time I was sitting around a table with people who had walked the walk that I was walking. And I thought, whoa, you mean I don't have to do that? Or I don't have, like, you realize when you talk to other people that you don't have to do those things because it's still going to be that individual's journey. It's still going to be a path that they walk. I can hand you the oxygen mask and you can put it on or not put it on. But when you walk out of situations with education, you kind of reach a point where you're like, you know what, I'm going to put my mask on. You do you. Mm-hmm. Here it is.
Yeah.
You can put it on or you can not put it on. I'll be over here breathing fresh air. So I think education cannot be downplayed enough in terms of the empowerment it gives a family. It's very like, it's next level empowerment when you understand. It really is, because you go back to the blame. You turn away. You start to go, oh, wait a second, this is something different. Oh, this is genetic. Oh, this is a disease. Oh, here are the things I can do.
Well, right. And one of the things that we teach in DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, is the idea that two opposite things can be true at the same time. I can love someone and need to put my own oxygen mask on and not hand them theirs. And those two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? And that, I think, is the crux of where families run into roadblocks is, how do I navigate am so deeply loving this family member, my wife, my husband, my child, my father, my mother, my sister, my brother, and if I don't enable them or help them, or if I kind of let them do their own oxygen mask, how do I understand within the core of myself that I'm still a worthwhile, good family member, human being, and reconcile that? Because often for people in the world of when we do therapy with these folks, generally that's the hardest thing for them to really own is, I can't do any of this for them, and I still love them very deeply, and I have to figure out how to reconcile those things.
And I think, in that statement of I can't do it for them, so we want to empower them. But I think the other part is, too, we're working with the family member, but we're also keeping in mind that there's probably been little to no healthy communication with the person using the substance. Mm-hmm. So I need to be thinking of them, too, and what's their voice, because the parent or the loved one's going to hear me because I'm coming in without that baggage. Mm-hmm. So if I can get their attention and start to work with them, I'm thinking of that client, so to speak, that loved ones. Like, for instance, families, if they're at that end, I'm done, I'm going to throw them out.
Right.
Throwing them out's not the answer. That it may be for some families, it may be that they can't see the hurt anymore and they can't take another step forward. But throwing them out's not the answer. It's putting them in a place, whether it's treatment, whether it's a recovery house, or whether it's a friend. But it's removing that piece. So understanding what is causing them not to take that next step. So it might be a visual thing. It might be just seeing their loved ones suffering. I mean, people that use substances sometimes, as you mentioned earlier, withdrawal. Right. They're struggling. And if they don't see that, the family can actually take the next step forward, and then that's reinforced a little bit, and then you take the next step, baby steps.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Gordon, can you go in a little deeper on the kind of growing need for mobile engagement services? You alluded earlier to the idea that you've been doing this 30 years. You said every 10 years or so, it feels like, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically that it feels like every 10 years, kind of there's like a new wave of a particular drug that maybe is just crippling families all over the place. Can you kind of go into the growth for someone like you that you have seen in the need of this, not only recently, as I alluded to, you said about every 10 years or so, but in your 30 years, just kind of the growth of having mobile engagement services, giving families an opportunity to try to figure some things out. Just maybe that's kind of where have things gone from where you started to where you are now in your role? How have you seen that growth? Where would you like to continue to see it to grow? And just what it can kind of offer families that maybe they haven't really thought about or considered.
In the substance world, general outreach is what it was called 30 years ago. You would meet people where they're at. So we would go out to actually above bars, and meet people who are on the streets. And the reason we found that to be effective is that these individuals were not looking for help. So we were more client-centered approach. Then as I think the social work field grew, and other fields as well, said we can't just focus on the client, we need to work on the family because that's where the support comes from. So we started connecting with the families, but they too, just like the client, were struggling to ask for help. It's an embarrassing, the shame, the guilt, everything that we mentioned early on. So going out and just talking with them kind of allowed us, again, to form the relationship that allowed us to see the growth. And then that's to see that hope grow in families, then you see people gaining recovery. So there's this traditional approach. We even experienced this during the pandemic. Everyone would come into the office and share their issues with a counselor. And then when the pandemic happened, we went virtual, right? And they found another way. Now, it always doesn't work that way. But for doctors, more doctors got to medicate individuals. They could have a 15-minute, and there weren't people not showing up where there was wasted time. And that's kind of where our mobile piece comes into play, that we get out there and we actually see them. We get out and see the environment. For instance, when I'm walking up to a house and I see in the recycling bin all these beer cans, but the person can, if they were walking into an office, would say, well, I've been sober for a week or 2 weeks. You get to see the truth in the matter. You get to see the circumstances. Maybe socioeconomically they're really struggling. You can understand why they have to work and they can't be in treatment because they would lose their house. Things like that I think evolve, and they're important issues to understand, because if you understand what they're battling, you're going to be able to connect with them. And it's all about the connection. If you connect either with the family or the individual, they're going to start seeing that you're genuine, you have the knowledge and understanding, the education to kind of take them forward.
I want to mention something, because I think something Gordon said needs to be said again, and that is that when we talk about the disease of addiction and we talk about the disease of a mental illness, you mentioned, choosing between recovery and losing your house. What's really interesting in the way especially recovery comes into play is the cost of recovery and the lack of complete coverage for recovery. And that's the piece that I think needs to be heard, and people need to understand that this is what I refer to as, this is the back of the card coverage. Mm-hmm. So if you have an insurance card and you flip your card over, that's where it says mental health and substance abuse services. It's not the front of the card, which is your physical health. It's the back of the card. And that right there separates the recovery option and cost. So many individuals go into recovery situations and come out with hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical bills, of recovery bills. I'm not even going to say medical bills, right, because if it was medical bills, it would be the front of the card,
and
right?
They'd be covered.
So, and I think when we look at individuals who do not have medical coverage, it then falls to a lot of our counties to cover those costs. And so there's disparity even amongst the amount of money each county can have. Mm-hmm. So when you look at addiction, whether it's alcohol, and I think it's important to mention that that's really, I think you'd both agree, that's number one. Alcohol is socially acceptable. We don't think about it. It's very dangerous. But I think we have to, as a community, look at this and say, we as a community need to look at this holistically to help not just reduce the stigma, not just that, but to care for one another in the same way that we would sign someone's cast when they break their arm.
Right.
We should be willing to be there for our neighbor the same way we would be if we're creating a meal train. And that piece doesn't happen. I think that would be such a huge change. So I just wanted to kind of highlight that, because I think that's something that a lot of people who haven't walked in this world or work in this world simply do not comprehend.
Right. I kind of want to jump in on a little more on that here, Jody.
Sure.
Why you mentioned, and I love that point, that you would sign someone's cast if they had broken their arm. Is it just because that a community as a whole maybe looks at addiction with a scoff, with a perhaps you've done this to yourself kind of mentality, that this, you break your arm, maybe that's a little bit more looked at as an accident, whether you were doing something that was smart or not, that's maybe looked at a little bit more as an accident, where when it comes to addiction, perhaps the vast majority of the community as a whole looks at that as you're making bad decisions kind of thing. Is that kind
I
of
always
maybe
say, I always say this, and I don't want to say everybody, right? But I want to be clear that I think for a lot of individuals, and this is, I say two things to people. Number one, addiction is not a moral failure. It's not a moral failure. And the other thing I try to say to people is, when you're in grade school and your teacher says, what do you want to be when you grow up? Nobody stands up and says, I want to be an alcoholic, or I want to be addicted to heroin. Nobody says that. So if we all just kind of take a humanity look at this and say, oh, shoot, this isn't a choice.
Yes.
It's not a choice.
You're right. And I would say yes, and let's think about that in a larger scope. Maybe you're listening to this and there is nobody in your family that has a substance use disorder or an addiction. I would say look a little harder and let's talk about process addictions. Let's talk about gambling, and let's talk about addiction to overspending and shopping and Amazon, right? Medical marijuana.
Hey. Don't come for me on Amazon.
Listen.
I feel seen now.
It's a problem for most of us.
That's where she gets all the cucumbers and sour cream from, on Amazon.
Has to be.
I have a garden.
So, but what I'm saying is, if you feel like I can't relate to that, and yes, if somebody's using IV drugs, they should be on the street, and that's just my view of it. Peel back the layers of the onion, my friend, and take a look at food addiction, gambling addiction, sex addiction, all of, we call those process addictions, right? So if it's not a substance. So it's the same neuro pathway. It's the same internal self-worth stuff that bubbles up for the gambling addict as it is for the heroin addict, as it is for the meth addict, as it is for the food addict, right? Find your space in your own head that lets you relate, and try to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah. You hear people say all the time, oh, I couldn't live without that. Think about that. I love how you said that. Make some space in your brain to reconcile that. Mm-hmm. And then maybe, just maybe, you look at another person who exists with alcohol in an abusive way and go, oh, wow. This morning I was on my way here. What did I ask you if you wanted?
Coffee, because you needed it. Right.
Yeah. I got tea. But yeah, that's my point, is take those moments of I can't live without.
Right. And so I would say whatever is your coping vice, and maybe it's running. Okay. Maybe
She's coming for you.
Maybe
now,
it's
Gordon.
cucumber and cream cheese. But if I said to you today, you know what, you can never run again.
Oof.
You need to stop today. Never, ever. Start right now. What does that bring up in you?
I'll probably cry.
Again. I know that's how you cope. I know it's kind of how, cucumbers.
So I control my world.
Right. You can't do that anymore. It's affecting your whole family. You're going to lose your house.
So we all do this. I would probably find something else, and it might be worse.
Right.
Right. And I think that's the piece where I think you're going is,
So when you say I give help every time I go, because I think...
How many chances do you give? Is that what you're saying?
I guess my maybe to be more specific is, how many chances do I get?
So there's unlimited chances. So to me, you give an opportunity to get healthy. And so every person's uniquely different. You
Right.
know, their families are uniquely different. Wow. Yeah, I would just say it's unlimited chances. But I also say in the same, I get why families get frustrated.
Yeah.
I get it. Like I see it. I see their pain, and that's where, you know, we use that term harm reduction. We try to meet them halfway.
Can you describe harm reduction? Because I think maybe some people don't realize what that is. I think we hear about, you know, needle giveaways, and we look at all those things, but really what is harm reduction when we talk about somebody who has an addiction?
So I think just the term harm reduction, some people have this thought process that it's just like a medication, but it's actually a thought process. Harm reduction is taking a goal that you want to get to and figuring out how you can take someone halfway, you know, meet them in between. And really you're weighing a balance between the good and bad that can come out of that decision, that process that you're taking. So harm reduction can be giving them less lunch money each week. It might be, here's $2, or I'm going to buy you that item and have it, because they're less likely to sell that item than if they just have cash where they could just go buy a drug. Like
Right. Yes.
It's different.
And harm reduction goes then all the way to, there's a really cool harm reduction program in Kensington, near Philly, in Philly. And it's about distributing clean needles and Narcan. And some people would say, well, doesn't that just enable people? But if I'm going to if I'm going to be able to help somebody stay alive, right? And that's my goal for today.
Yep.
And once they have some clean needles and maybe their skin isn't falling off and their sores from you know, all of the we talked about all these new drugs that are out there and infections. You know, if I can start to get them a little healthier, then I might have the chance to have an MES worker get through if they're not, you know.
You said the most important piece. They're alive. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's the piece that I think people need to think about when they have very strong opinions on Narcan, for example. You know, Narcan, you know, being such a lifesaver with individuals who either have intentionally or accidentally overdosed. You know, people have very strong opinions about that. But when it's your loved one and you get to say they're alive, let's kind of remember that for a minute. Like,
so I have a short story. So I was one of those opponents against Narcan. When it first came out, I was like, no, we're going to just allow people to keep using drugs. So they're going to Narcan themselves and they're going to go right back to use.
Sure.
And so that was the stigma that I kind of carried until, and I shouldn't say until, because I started changing when I started seeing the effects of it. But when I actually saved someone's life, you know, I used it right on our front steps, you know, and to know that person survived, you know, that family member had another opportunity to help change them. Yeah. That's really powerful. And so it doesn't have to be to that degree that someone actually dies, although it does happen that way with some of the drugs, but just giving them that little bit of change, you know, that opportunity. But not everyone gets that opportunity. Like we don't see it. I think, you know, there's a disservice in movies that people, you know, take a drug and they're going to be okay, but it's not. How many people are now on the streets? Looking at Lehigh Valley, how many people live on the bridges? If you talk to those individuals, and I do.
Yeah, you do. Know, yeah, that's the difference.
There's people that have degrees. There are individuals that have children that they haven't seen in 5 years. That's all because the buildup, no one met them at that first step. And it just, unfortunately, in an unhealthy way, it just led to them losing almost everything in their life.
Yeah, it's true.
So, Gordon, first of all, credit to you for sharing that story. Effect that it could have on somebody. For people that are looking for mobile engagement services, how do you begin? Where do you start? If somebody wants to talk to somebody like you, what's just kind of that first step in the process that people need to go through?
Yeah, I think you can call just St. Luke's University and the hospital, and you ask for mobile engagement services, and they'll connect. So we, just like there's multiple doors to get help, there's also multiple ways to get services in place. So you can go through any intake throughout the network, whether it's mental health or drug and alcohol, and once that assessment occurs, they can kind of determine here's a need. But if they directly want it, they can just contact the recovery center, the St. Luke's Penn Foundation, and they'll take their information, and then we'll call them back. But that's not just families that call too. Mm-hmm. We have outside services that call. So children and youth make phone calls, probation officers, judges make phone calls, employers make phone calls. So anyone can have mobile engagement services, and we actually are just starting mobile engagements. We start next Monday, as a matter of fact, in the Lehigh Valley. So we exist in both Bucks County and Montgomery County, and now really the need has been met, by the hospital. Yeah, it's going to be phenomenal to be able to just get out there and meet individuals in the Lehigh Valley.
But Gordon, here's a question: what if somebody's listening to us in Colorado? Like, where's a good place to start?
Wow. So there aren't many mobile programs. I mean, crisis departments are probably the first place you could call and see what they have. What we have is really unique. I mean, there's no one in the state that I'm aware of that has our particular service. They usually have a case management, or they have a crisis person, which is more mental health, but they don't have that unique combination of the two. So unfortunately, I think outside of our 3 counties, there isn't mobile engagement. I mean, we're just unique. So
maybe primary care doc again. Start there.
Or SAMHSA. Is there a
national?
SAMHSA, like a national hotline?
They have sites, and they'll connect you to your local services. Again, I think if you're looking for that particular mobile piece, but I don't think you have to start with the mobile piece. You can just start by having a conversation, right? Have a conversation with someone about information about drugs and alcohol.
Yeah. I think, just to reiterate, mobile engagement services, the service that Gordon has been growing and spearheading for 30 years, here's another sign that we need to do more, and that's that it currently exists in, as of next Monday, 3 counties in Pennsylvania.
That's it.
So that means that it's not addressing that mobile component. Now, not to say that there aren't counties that offer a mobile piece, case management and things like that, but when you look at the efficacy of mobile engagement services as a name, as a copyright, the success of it is so significant that I'm looking forward to a year from now really seeing the work that you are doing in now a new county, right? And seeing the lives that are changed and the work that gets to be done. Gordon, I thank you for your commitment to your work. And I also thank for your humility to say, look, I was against this, but now I saw the fact that people's lives are being saved. And I think it's just amazing. And we really thank you for being here, because, and I think we can provide some in the show notes. We can provide some other, helplines or tip lines or things like that. But thanks for.
Just make a phone call. Anyone that you think is in a helping position will find a way to connect you to drug and alcohol services, for sure.
Yeah.
I think the thing we always come back to a lot at the end of our episodes is just the idea of empathy and sympathy, trying to understand someone's situation, even if maybe you don't completely understand it yourself, or you have been there yourself in the case of sympathy. Jody, I wanted to come back to that line that you had, though. Sign someone's cast if they broke their arm. Be there for somebody in the same way if they're dealing with addiction, because it can certainly help keep someone alive, is really the pull away that I think we all have from this episode. It is the Just Start the Conversation podcast. It is brought to you by St. Luke's Penn Foundation Mental Health Services. For Jody, McCloud, Missmer, and Amie Alanson Dundon, always a pleasure, my friends. For Gordon Hornig, he is the Mobile Engagement Services Director, who is keeping that thing just chugging along after 30 years. Continued success, my friend, at St. Luke's Penn Foundation Mental Health Services. Hopefully the next time, Gordon, you and I talk, you're not on vacation. And hopefully the next time we talk, maybe mental health services are on the front of the card and not the back of the card. So keep doing what you're doing. I think it's amazing. And so good luck to you, my friend, in all your efforts.
Thank you.
Once again, want to thank everybody for joining us for the Just Start the Conversation podcast.